Most people don't fail because they're not smart enough. They don't fail because they lack talent. And they don't fail because they were born without opportunities. They fail because somewhere along the way, they accepted a smaller version of themselves. Not overnight, not dramatically, just one small thought at a time. I'm probably not qualified. Someone else can do it better. It's too late for me. I'm not ready. And eventually those thoughts become a ceiling so familiar that people stop noticing it's there. What's fascinating is that two people can start in almost the exact same place, similar intelligence, similar education, similar resources, and end up living completely different lives. One spends decades feeling stuck. The other creates opportunities, grows, leads, and achieves things that once seemed impossible. So what creates the difference? According to David Schwartz, the answer is surprisingly simple. The size of your life is often determined by the size of your thinking. And that's what makes this book so powerful, because it isn't really about success. It's about the invisible mental habits that quietly shape everything we become. Published more than half a century ago, The Magic of Thinking Big has influenced entrepreneurs, leaders, executives, creators, and everyday people across generations. But despite its age, the central message feels surprisingly modern. The world changes, technology changes, industries change. But human psychology doesn't change nearly as much. People still doubt themselves. People still make excuses. People still underestimate what they're capable of becoming. And that's exactly where this book begins. Not with strategies, not with productivity systems, but with a question. What if the biggest obstacle in your life isn't outside of you? What if it's the way you've been thinking? Most people don't consciously choose small lives. They simply adapt to small expectations. The expectations of family, the expectations of friends, the expectations of society, and eventually the expectations they place on themselves. A child dreams freely, then reality arrives, criticism arrives, comparison arrives, failure arrives. Little by little, possibility gets replaced with caution. Instead of asking, "What can I become?" people start asking, "What's realistic?" And while realism sounds wise, it often becomes a disguise for fear. The tragedy isn't that people fail. The tragedy is that many never attempt the things that matter most to them. Not because they can't, but because they've already convinced themselves they can't. And that's where Schwartz introduces the first life-changing idea. Think about the last time you faced something difficult, maybe applying for a better position, starting a business, changing careers, creating content online, beginning a degree, learning a new skill. Before any action happened, something happened internally. You formed a belief. Either I can figure this out, or this probably won't work. The outcome often starts there, not because belief magically changes reality, but because belief changes behavior. When people believe something is possible, they start looking for solutions. When they believe something is impossible, they start looking for evidence that proves it. The situation hasn't changed, only the thinking has, and suddenly everything changes. This is one of the book's most powerful ideas. Belief acts like a command center. If you believe success is possible, your brain begins searching for pathways. If you believe failure is inevitable, your brain begins building barriers. Many people wait for confidence before acting, but confidence often comes after belief. First, you decide something is possible, then you begin moving. Then, confidence grows. The people we admire are rarely the people with perfect certainty. They're usually the people who moved before certainty arrived. How many opportunities have disappeared from your life simply because you assumed you weren't ready? And how many doors never opened because you never knocked? Schwartz gives excuses a memorable name: excusitis, the disease of explaining away your potential. It's easy to recognize in other people, harder to recognize in ourselves. Some people blame their health, some blame their age, some blame their education, some blame their background, some blame bad luck, and some blame circumstances. The details change, the pattern stays the same. An excuse feels comforting because it removes responsibility, but it also removes power. The moment every outcome becomes someone else's fault, your ability to change that outcome disappears too. The book challenges a difficult truth. Most successful people had valid excuses. They simply refused to build their identity around them. The question isn't whether obstacles exist. Of course they do. The question is whether those obstacles become explanations or permanent definitions. There's a huge difference. One says, "This is difficult." The other says, "This is who I am." One leaves room for growth. The other locks the door. The next time you catch yourself saying, "I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm not smart enough, I don't have enough resources," pause. Ask yourself, is this a fact or is this an excuse disguised as a fact? That single question can change your future. One of the biggest myths about confidence is that confident people feel fearless. They don't. They simply act despite fear. Fear grows in inactivity. It feeds on delay. It expands inside uncertainty. Think about a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. The longer you wait, the larger it becomes in your imagination. The mind starts creating scenarios, worst-case outcomes, embarrassing possibilities, catastrophes. But something strange happens once action begins. Fear starts shrinking, because reality replaces imagination. The book repeatedly emphasizes a simple principle: action cures fear. This doesn't mean reckless action. It means movement. A phone call, an application, a conversation, a first draft, a first video, a first step. Many people spend years preparing for a future they never enter. Meanwhile, someone less qualified starts. And because they start, they learn. Because they learn, they improve. Because they improve, they succeed. Not because they were fearless, because they acted. This is the idea most people remember from the book. Think bigger. But what does that actually mean? It doesn't mean fantasy. It doesn't mean arrogance. It means refusing to measure your future solely by your present circumstances. Most people use today's conditions to predict tomorrow. Big thinkers reverse the process. They imagine tomorrow first, then they build toward it. Small thinking asks, what if it fails? Big thinking asks, what if it works? Small thinking focuses on obstacles. Big thinking focuses on possibilities. Small thinking sees limitations. Big thinking sees options. This mindset changes everything: relationships, careers, businesses, creativity, leadership, because your decisions are always connected to the future you believe is possible. If you imagine a tiny future, you make tiny decisions. If you imagine a meaningful future, you begin making meaningful decisions. Not instantly, but consistently, and consistency changes lives. One of the most overlooked ideas in the book is the influence of environment. Not just physical environment, mental environment. The people you listen to, the conversations you have, the content you consume, the voices surrounding your life. Many people unknowingly spend years absorbing negativity. People who criticize every dream, people who find problems in every possibility, people who have mastered the art of discouragement. Eventually, that thinking becomes contagious. Because thoughts spread, attitudes spread, expectations spread. The book encourages a simple but powerful shift. Protect your mental environment. Spend more time around builders than complainers, more time around learners than cynics, more time around possibility than pessimism. Your environment doesn't determine your destiny, but it strongly influences the direction you're moving. Perhaps the deepest idea in the entire book is this: people often behave according to their self-image. Someone who secretly believes they're unimportant behaves differently. They speak differently. They negotiate differently. They present themselves differently. They hesitate more. They apologize more. They shrink. Meanwhile, someone who believes they have value behaves differently too. Not arrogantly, not selfishly, but confidently. They treat their ideas seriously. They treat their goals seriously. They treat themselves seriously. And eventually, the world responds. Because people often mirror the value we place on ourselves. This doesn't mean pretending. It means recognizing your worth before external validation arrives. The world rarely gives confidence to people who refuse to give it to themselves. How much of your life has been shaped by things that were never actually true? Stories you told yourself, labels you accepted, limitations you inherited, fears you repeated so often they felt like facts. What if the person you're capable of becoming is already there, waiting beneath years of unnecessary doubt? Without goals, effort scatters, energy gets wasted, days blur together, years disappear. The book emphasizes that successful people don't drift, they aim. Goals create clarity, clarity creates action, action creates momentum, momentum creates results. The future isn't built in giant dramatic moments, it's built in ordinary days, guided by a clear direction. Every meaningful achievement begins as an image in someone's mind, a possibility, a vision, a goal. The goal doesn't need to be perfect, it simply needs to exist. because direction beats wandering every single time. At first glance, this book seems to be about achievement, bigger careers, bigger goals, bigger success. But beneath all of that is a much deeper message. You have far more influence over your future than you think, not complete control. Life will always contain uncertainty, setbacks, losses, unexpected turns, but your thinking determines how you respond to them, and your response determines far more than most people realize. The mind is not just a mirror reflecting reality, it's also a tool for shaping reality. The stories you repeat become beliefs, beliefs become actions, actions become habits, habits become identity, and identity becomes destiny. Years from now, your life may look very different from today. Different work, different opportunities, different relationships, different challenges, different dreams. But one thing will quietly remain at the center of it all: the conversation happening inside your own mind. The voice telling you what's possible, the voice explaining why you can or why you can't, the voice encouraging growth or defending limitation. Every day that voice is casting a vote for the future version of you. Maybe the greatest lesson from this book isn't that thinking big creates success. Maybe it's that thinking small creates invisible prisons. And many of those prisons were never locked in the first place. Sometimes a bigger life doesn't begin with a bigger opportunity. Sometimes it begins with a bigger thought. And if one idea from this book stays with you after today, let it be this: the limits that shape your future deserve to be questioned. Because the person you become tomorrow is often hiding inside what you choose to believe today. And if exploring powerful ideas through books helps you see yourself in the world a little differently, there are always more pages waiting to be opened.